Hello everyone, and welcome to my reaction to the brand new Doctor Who episodes Space Babies and The Devil's Chord. I've tried to think of some things to say just before we get into the stories, but so far when recording this it hasn't gone too well, so we'll just jump straight in with Space Babies. If I'm perfectly honest, this episode for me was not hitting the mark, and I don't really understand the decision to have this as the opening episode of the series, which would now be Series 1 instead of Series 14, or was it Season? Oh, it's a very confusing system now. I don't get the decision to call it Season 1. I understand that, yes, there's going to be new viewers, but you can't claim that this is for new viewers when this episode feels very unfriendly to new audiences, especially those in America who probably haven't watched since the 50th anniversary, or maybe even the beginning of the Jodie era. Though I have to say that its strengths lie within the first 10 minutes. We get a pretty decent explanation of what everything is, with Ruby being a brand new companion. She needs to have the story told to her. Who the Doctor is, where they come from, what's a TARDIS, and also showing the TARDIS's capabilities. We start by going to the past, being 150 million years in the past, around Wyoming in the US, and then going to the future, where the main story takes place. The issue I have is that this really rushes the story, and it's something similar with the end of the world in Series 1. It does feel like RTD is just rehashing everything that he did in Series 1, especially at the beginning, where he's trying to get the audience up to speed with what this show is, so you don't have to go back and watch everything beforehand. My constant thought was RTD has essentially just stolen all of his ideas from Series 1 of how to introduce everything, and then put it in here. Ruby looking out into space, just like Rose did. Getting her phone to connect to the modern day so she can call her mam, just like Rose did. In fact, Minnie Gibson doesn't even look that too far from Billie Piper, which, I mean, obviously that is a complete coincidence, but it is something that I've noticed. The translation circuits, the explanation of that, it just feels like he's completely reused everything from End of the World, and I suppose he kind of has to. Because how else are you going to explain to audiences how everything works? Like the translation circuits, the TARDIS, who the Doctor is. I was born a very long time ago, all my people are gone, etc., etc. There's only so many ways that you can tell that story. But here it just feels very blatantly done, and also quite rushed. This episode is only 50 minutes long, and I think it would have really benefited from being an hour long, or maybe even longer. So let's get on to the main plot point, being the space babies on the space station. 6 years prior, they'd been left by all the adults, and the baby-making machine hadn't been turned off because of laws on the planet below stopping them from doing so. The babies themselves, for me, were possibly the worst part of the story. As soon as they showed up and started speaking with the mouths barely moving, and the baby actors looking at the cast just like, what am I doing here? Where am I? Oh, it wasn't great. The CGI on the mouths was terrible. It didn't line up with what they were saying. But also, how do you get that to look good? At the end of the day, it's a baby. You can't direct a baby and say, right, give me surprise, give me fear. Well, you can definitely get a baby to give you fear, just scare it, don't you? But give me happiness. You can't get a baby to do that. So why write an episode about babies? There was also when they started crying, and I was thinking, you're airing this at 12 a.m. It is the middle of the night, and you're having these babies cry so loud. I had to turn the TV down quite significantly, not wake people up. I mean, speaking of the 12 a.m, I'm not being funny, but as British people, we pay the licence for the BBC to make this show. Yes, Disney have got a, I think, 2-year contract to assist Bad Wolf and the BBC with any kind of funding and give, well, funding towards it. But why are you lining this up with America? They are 5 hours behind on, I think, Eastern Standard Time, meaning they watched it at 7, not the usual 6, where we would watch it. I don't care if they are going to get spoiled. I don't care if that's the problem. That is why you're doing this. Just stay off the internet for 5 hours. It's not that hard. Most people in America will be at work anyway. So what is the reasoning for doing this? It just feels like a slap in the face from Bad Wolf and the BBC, to be honest. Well, not the BBC. I highly doubt that was a BBC decision. But it does feel like a slap in the face from RTD and Disney. But anyway, moving on from that before we get too far into it. One thing that I did particularly love with this was the humour in the episode. I wrote down in my notes quite a few of the jokes that actually did make me chuckle a little bit, such as the Star Trek joke, the making babies for food to eat. I mean, why would Ruby's first thing be, maybe they're using them for food? Growing babies for food. Oh, fantastic. Whenever the lady who plays Queen Charlotte in Bridgerton shows up, I unfortunately don't remember the character or the actor's name, so I'm going to be referring to her as Queen Charlotte throughout. Whenever she was using bad language, it would then use the nanny filter to say stuff like waste or illegitimate person. Oh, fantastic. It's just some of RTD's strong points coming through. I feel like one of the things RTD can particularly write is humour into an episode, but in this one in particular, the jokes were funny, but it really reminded me of The End of Time in terms of it bringing down the serious bits. A big problem I had with The End of Time, just to go on a bit of a side tangent, was that 1 second you'd have an extremely serious scene, and then the next second it would be all light-hearted jokes and laughs. And that's exactly what happened here. The Doctor would be saying, my home is gone, blah blah blah, oh, it's terrible, I'm the last of the Time Lords, and then it's just like, oh, slay queen. It just feels very mixed messages out of place, I don't know. Very strange. This episode has also furthered the idea for me that Ruby is essentially just an amalgam of previous companions, particularly Amy, Clara, Martha, and especially Rose. Because yet again we have a companion where she is integral to the universe. There is some strange phenomenon about her that has changed time and made everything run wild. Exactly the same thing that we've had for the past few series, barring Chris Chibnall, which was really good to see. I mean, take the mick out of Chibnall for all you want, but one thing that he did absolutely nail was the fact that the companions were just normal people, exactly like the classic series. I mean, you want to complain about Chibnall not going back to proper Doctor Who, just take one look at his companions, because they are proper Doctor Who. And for me, this episode was not proper Doctor Who. What do I define as proper Doctor Who? Not too sure. But whatever it was, this wasn't it. The Devil's Chord, on the other hand, is exactly everything that I'd personify as proper Doctor Who, barring the twist ending, which, for me, I'll get onto later, but let's just say I was not a huge fan of it. Let's talk about the main part of this episode, the Maestro. The Maestro is possibly one of the best Doctor Who villains to come out of the last 5 or 6 years. I honestly thought that Jinx Monsoon's performance was fantastic. It fit the character and the show perfectly. And anyone that says that, anyone that says that Jinx Monsoon's character was terrible or not Doctor Who, or just an excuse for diversity, etc., etc., because they use they and them pronouns, is just full of waste product. Let's put it that way. The Maestro is the exact same as several other villains that have appeared throughout the past. I'd compare them to, of course, the Toymaker, which we now know to be their father, Fenric in some capacity, and maybe slightly Sutek. And then also there's the whole pantheon of the gods thing, which is something that has appeared before. We've got the White and the Black Guardians, the Toymaker, the Great Intelligence, and the Great Old One from the Web Planet. Very, very strange one, that. The idea that the salt at the end of the universe has essentially created a brand new universe after the post-Time War universe, where we've got magic able to run wild and godlike forces just able to come out of nothing, such as playing a specific chord on a piano, releasing this untamable beast, is fantastic. It does feel like RTD in that regard has breathed some new life into the show. But that doesn't mean that we've forgotten the old one, as we do get some exposition into the past and a little bit of an explanation into the Doctor's family, which is a lot better done here than it was in Space Babies. That may be because we only really got one thing, and that's a sort of explanation of where Susan is. Susan has been this one thing that's been constantly debated throughout Doctor Who. Where is Susan? Did they survive the Time War or not? Have they regenerated since their original incarnation as Carol Ann Ford? And the simple fact is, we know as much as the Doctor, which is nothing. Where is Susan? We don't know. I mean, they are, for one fact, in Totter's Lane, just a few miles away, which was fantastic to see that being referenced, even after the whole Steph Coburn thing. It's a really nice breadcrumb to the new fans to say, hey, there's this whole show going back to 1963, which is where, of course, the episode is set. Why don't you check it out? What was strange to me is that this episode was basically marketed as the Beatles episode. This is where the Beatles show up and do some awesome stuff with the Doctor and Ruby. I don't even think they got 5 whole minutes of screen time. Why were the Beatles so massively integral to this story, yet they didn't have any part in it at all? It was so strange to see. After all this advertising, months of this is the Beatle episode, and they don't even appear in it for that long. I don't even think that they were in the last song at the end with the twist ending. Yes, they did end up saving the day, being Paul and John, but other than that, what did they really do? What was the purpose of them being here? It was really all down to Ruby Sunday. Speaking of music, we got quite a few moments where the maestro would break the fourth wall and start playing the Doctor Who theme, even in a distorted version to make the TARDIS run wild. Now, the Doctor Who theme is loosely based off of the TARDIS's dematerialization sound, but it was a really good transition from them playing the piano to the actual Doctor Who theme. And speaking of the new title sequence and theme, it's really, really good. A massive improvement on the ones in the specials. I don't really like the kind of whispering or scatting that's going on in the background of it, but the visuals are fantastic, and it's good to see that they've updated it with brand new section to it, and the logo itself has changed. The logo in the last couple was a little bit strange in places, but they've really fleshed it out and properly implemented it here. Perhaps in stark contrast to Space Babies, I really, really enjoyed The Devil's Chord, up until the twist at the end, as it's not really my thing to have a musical number at the end. I didn't like it when it was in Church on Ruby Road, and I don't really like it here. But I was quite pleased to see that even though this was said to be all over Twitter and all over the news that this was going to be the musical episode, where there's going to be musical numbers everywhere, I personally don't think that musical numbers fit into Doctor Who. It's not that kind of show. And I was really glad to see that that wasn't just the whole episode, so I could actually enjoy it. Some setup for the future. The One Who Waits is still perhaps the main contender for overarching antagonist, and perhaps it's the character of Susan Twist. Susan Twist has appeared in a previous special, I believe in Wild Blue Yonder, as Isaac Newton's maid, and is going to appear throughout the series, as we've seen on, I think, IMDb. So perhaps Susan Twist will be revealed as the One Who Waits. As we know now, it isn't the Maestro. If she's actually going to be playing a character that we've previously seen, my main bet here is that Susan Twist is going to be revealed as the White Guardian, watching over the Doctor battling against the Pantheon of the Gods, waiting to see whether they'll win, maybe influencing the outcome a little bit. I don't know, it's just a theory at the end of the day. There's also the big case of who exactly is Ruby Sunday and what is going on with Ruby Sunday. At the end of this episode, she kind of gets the treatment of Amy Pond, where the Doctor scans her body to see what on earth is going on, how is she affecting time in some way, and then perhaps chooses to travel with her just because of that fact. That's what happens in the 11th hour. Amy Pond only really travels with the Doctor because, 1, he made a promise, and 2, who on earth is she? It's going to be interesting to see how this develops through the rest of the series. For the next episode in the next time trailer, we got just the Doctor standing on a landmine in the middle of what looks like a crater or a quarry. I have zero thoughts on this. It didn't reveal too much, and the episode's title is literally just Boom. So we can assume that there's going to be some kind of explosion. I don't know if I'm reading too deep into that or not, but there's likely going to be an explosion. But anyway, guys, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed my reaction and want to hear my thoughts on other Doctor Who stuff, then consider checking out my other videos, particularly the New Beginnings series, which vaguely relates to this kind of stuff, where it's the first and last episodes. But if you enjoyed, make sure to leave a like and subscribe down below, as it really helps out the channel. As always, thanks for watching.